Hiya, and welcome to this week's episode of Inside Property Development, where we're speaking with Richard Stone, who is an expert in project and construction management and knowing exactly how to get things built the right way.
How are we doing, Paul?
Very good. Thanks for coming.
It's all right. Good to be here.
Tell us, what do you do?
I'm a chartered project manager and cost consultant, so I do that as a profession. We've got our own developments, but I also teach and train people in project management and basically take people from experimenting through their first and early deals into being experienced developers.
Just in terms of, well, actually, let's do your sort of like CV first, because that's really, really important.
My CV.
The amount of people out there talking and training people that don't actually know what they're doing themselves just drives me around the bend.
It's scary. It is really scary.
It is literally the blind leading the blind.
Yeah.
So I know that obviously that's not the case with you. So tell me how you got started and all the rest of it.
So I was in my first footing at 5 years old with my dad. It was a QS doing a rear and wraparound extension in Birmingham. And that's where I got my love for construction from. Taking all the materials from out the front, like the bricks, the blocks, the concrete, the timber, and turning it into something tangible. Because before that, I'd only played with Lego and Meccano and stuff like that. Metal Meccano, do you remember that old stuff?
Yeah.
And I used to just love building stuff. So to actually build something in real world was like, this is cool as fuck. I just loved it. It was brilliant. And also not just the creation of the physical asset, like the teamwork and the camaraderie and like the banter. I mean, like we had Taffy the Chippy who'd got like half his leg missing because he'd done a runner from an Indian one night, lashed up. And they'd done him with a samurai sword. Oh, he was the carpenter. We had like flat roofers that we left the scaffold up and they turned up and was like, we don't want a scaffold, get that down, it's in the way. We would just use a ladder. It was like, I mean, this was like early 1980s.
Yeah.
So very different health and safety world. It was, for me, it was kind of like the team spirit and they're creating something like tangible. And when I sat down with my old man and he was telling me about like,
so he was a QS, your dad?
He was a QS, yeah. He's still here, but he's retired now. But then understanding like how much that was worth, I was like, this is cool. I really liked it. And I just got the bug for it. We moved when I was 8 to Bristol. And at 11, I got a job in a pub. And I was quite fortunate. I got a job washing up. And the landlord at the time, he had a son and a daughter. The son was a landscaper and the daughter, her boyfriend was a scaffolder. And basically, because I grafted hard bottling up in the pub and washing up, I ended up working for the son and the son-in-law at weekends, just like labouring, unloading lorries of turf and stuff. But again, it was kind of like, one, it was a bit of cash on the ear, but secondly, it was like that team spirit, creating stuff. I loved it. And then at 13, we moved house because my dad got promoted. We moved back from Bristol to Buckinghamshire then. And
whereabouts in Buckinghamshire?
Village called Wing.
Okay.
So just outside Aylesbury. Sort of had to change school and all that. Didn't really fit in at school because everyone's already made like all their little groups.
Yeah.
But which was a big part of it. I got bullied a bit because I talked funny. But also, I was used to like being like working with men. You know what I mean? So I'd be like I used to like skip school a bit, and because I could go and earn money, and I just loved the banter of it. So to go and try and like pal about with 13-year-old kids, like just didn't hold any interest to me because I was already out earning money. I was like labouring for scaffolders. I was doing a bit of fixing. Was like labouring for fencing. I was putting up fencing. School just didn't really sort of, apart from like it was where the rugby pitch was and the cigarette shop. I didn't really like have any kind of interest apart from maths and technical drawing. They're the only two things that I really sort of enjoyed. So then I left school, 16. So I was fencing because I looked at it and I thought, I can go and do fencing. I don't need like thousands of pounds worth of power tools. Like I looked at chippies and I got like $5,000 worth of tools. I'm like, that ain't a bit of me. So I just went labour only fencing for probably about 5 years. We're still doing like a bit of scaffolding for like other people, but you need a lot of dough to set a scaffold firm up. Yeah. So I was like, yeah, I don't really fancy that. And then at 21, I sort of had a bit of a point in life and I thought, do you know what? This is great. I'm earning really good money, but I'm knocking my bollocks out. Like my back's going to be done, my knees are going to be done. So I went to college, did my ONC, HNC, because I kind of sort of thought, you know, construction project management, like when you're putting up fencing and scaffolding, you're kind of like, you're not in the property, you're outside it. So you get to see like how all the different things happen. Not like conscious learning, but you see all of those things, and you like when you've been on hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of sites, you start to recognise like patterns and like how things happen.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, I think that could be something that interests me. I'd had a little spell at John Lang's on their management training program.
We talked about this before.
Yeah.
I was at Lang's as well.
Yeah.
Who, important for people to know, like, I mean, we're a fantastic
They
operation.
were like the absolute kind of like everybody, like if you think of a mobile phone now, people are like Apple.
Yeah.
Like John Lang's were the go-to of construction. They're the best management training program in the world.
Exactly.
They're the best set of construction data ever because they measured everything. They were brilliant, but it was a massive business. And I was young. I'd already been earning good money on the tools. As a management trainee, you get shit money. I was getting like £40 a week. And I was like, I could earn more than this by morning on the tools. So I'd done it for a while and then I fucked it off because I just thought, do you know what? I can earn more money on the tools. And at the time, that was the thing that motivated me.
Yeah.
So I left, went back on the tools and then paid my own way to do my own O&C and HNC. And it was really interesting because like I was at college and there was kids there where their company were paying them to be there and they were fucking around, like winding the tutor up. And in the end, like, I had a couple of scraps with kids. It cost me a lot of money. I remember paying out $3,500.
Paying yourself, were you?
Yeah, I had to pay it myself, yeah. I remember like writing the check out, like when you used to write checks out to Barnfield College for like $3,500. And I said to this kid, I'm fucking I've paid to sit here and learn from this geezer. Like, if you don't want a beer, just go.
Yeah.
But stop annoying everyone else. And the guy that does my safety now, I met at college 30 plus years ago, and we still work together now. We're still good pals.
I also did HNC construction
Did
management.
you?
Yeah. Because I always wanted to be a developer. Mm-hmm. And in those days, I thought that in order to be a really good developer, you had to know everything about construction, which is partly true.
Yeah, it helps to a degree,
Yeah.
but sometimes I think it can be a bit of a hindrance as well.
But you got to know the other stuff, and the other
Yes.
stuff I came to realise was land and planning.
Yeah,
so I
absolutely.
then spent the rest of my career trying to make myself a bit of an expert in that. Proper, education and experience, really.
Skills, knowledge, attitude, training, escape model. You can't not have one of those things and be like holistic and be successful. You've got to know. You've got to have all of that stuff to be able to do it properly, because otherwise, that's when you're either leaving money on the table because your numbers ain't right, or nothing's ever a deal because your numbers are massively wrong, or you end up losing the shirt off your back because the numbers are wrong and actually it doesn't stack up as a deal and it's too late, you can't get out of it. You've got to know all of that stuff end to end, really, to be successful in development, I think.
Obviously, when I do little talks and stuff, I quite often I show a chart from the Home Builders Federation about the peak of SME developers and house builders, which was 1988. Yeah,
it was indeed. Yeah,
and in those days, you'll know. In fact, how old are you?
48.
God, you're a youngster. So
I don't feel it.
But in those days, being a good builder was good enough, actually. It was what it was all about. Lots of the little contractors, little house builders, they were just really good builders.
That's exactly where they started.
Built a couple of houses, or maybe 10 or 20 or 50 or even 100, the bigger ones.
Yeah.
And that was good enough. Then planning got crazy silly.
Yeah.
And it didn't matter how good a builder you were, you just couldn't afford with the time and the cost of the bullshit. And as a result, they've just disappeared, and it's carried on that way.
It's a shame because there were some really good firms that were in that space. But being a good builder is great. But being a good builder starts really. I mean, if you get involved really early, like stage 4. So when I say stage 4, I'm talking about like the REBA Plan of Works model.
Yeah.
But like technical design, reality, most builders don't get involved until stage 5 when they're actually on site. But to get from zero, like definition, to there, is probably that much in terms of roadmap. But most builders start on this part here. If you don't do all of this first, you're never going to get to that bit. They don't necessarily always understand that. And even if they do understand it, they're not resourced and don't have the skills to be able to know how to get there in the first place. Yeah. And that's unfortunate, because I teach a lot of tradespeople. I've got a massive love for the trades because it's where I started. I think more people need to understand that. And I think construction would be a more attractive prospect for people coming into it, or to want to come into it, if they realise that actually being on the tools and being in the trades is a good gateway into development. But no one they don't teach that. Schools don't teach construction. Schools still teach construction as kind of like the dumping ground for anybody who like mucks around at school or ain't too clever and isn't in the top sort of percentile of kids in the class. Well, that's not the case. Construction's way more technical nowadays. It's not a case of just lashing a bit of copper in the floor and you've got a heating system. You've got loads more calculations and stuff that go into air source heat pumps and all that kind of technology. Building regs are harder to achieve these days.
Yeah.
It's become a much more technical game than it used to be. Back in the 80s, it was like, everyone was on the piss. Like, you'd go to the pub at lunchtime and be back on site in the afternoon. Like, it's a different world
it's
now.
interesting. When you mentioned earlier about health and safety in those days, and I said, tell me about it. This is not a recommendation, but absolutely, I remember, literally, you're working on a building site and people used to go to the pub at lunchtime.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've got to say, luckily enough, hands up, I never did.
Did you not?
No,
See,
I didn't actually. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but always work-wise, I've never drunk in a day because I guess I just know that you're just not on it the same as you would be if you weren't drinking. But in those days, it was crazy. Jesus Christ, people drinking on a building site.
For people watching or listening, to put a timestamp on it, we're probably talking about the late 90s, early noughties, and it was naughty in construction. I remember, and this is when John Lang's was John Lang's and O'Rourke's was an Irish framing subcontractor. Yeah. I was on a project where we were main contractor. It was a nuclear bunker, and O'Rourke's were our subby. And
not Sizewell B.
No, it's in the middle of England. I won't say where it was. And we used to go to the pub every lunchtime. And the concrete finishing manager that was on this guy called Jerry, he was about 7'6" tall, and he got hands about this big, enormous. We used to walk into the pub, and he would order 5 pints of Guinness. And before the fourth one was poured, he'd drunk the first one.
Jesus.
He was an absolute animal. And we went into the pub on St. Patrick's Day, and I didn't drink Guinness. I drank lager. And he said, what can I get you? I said, I'll have a pint of whatever it was. I don't even know what it was. Maybe like Foster's or something, because it was lunchtime. No, Kronenberg 1664, that's what it was. I'm not buying that shit. I don't buy that shit for anyone. You'll drink Guinness. I don't drink Guinness. I don't like it. And he went, you'll get to like it. And he ordered me 5 pints of Guinness. And from that day, I've always loved Guinness. We had a guy come on site who was teetotal. He was a pioneer in Ireland as part of a group where they take a pledge to never ever drink.
Okay.
And I always think of green and white concrete lorries because Pioneer used to be a concrete company. Yeah. But this guy came onto site, and I'll never forget, he was an engineer and he wasn't that great, and he made a couple of errors with some datums on site. And he was having a row with this concrete finishing guy, and the bloke said something to him, and he went, yeah, but you're always on the piss. He said, I might be on the piss. He said, but I'm far better fucking pissed than you'll ever be sober. Now get off my site. And he had a point, because it didn't matter how much beer this guy drank. He was always on it.
It was construction, which I'm sure neither of us are condoning that, obviously.
No,
because
definitely not.
It was fucking dangerous.
It was, yeah. Mental.
Crazy.
You look at the death rates at that point in time, and it's not acceptable now that we're still well over 150 deaths in the construction industry a year. But it used to be thousands. It has come down.
It's a completely different world now.
But it's not. I'm not in any way, shape, or condoning it. But alcohol's not really a big problem. Well, not as big a problem in construction now. It's much more about drugs these days.
Is it?
Yeah, massively. You go on any of the big house builder sites, they don't even do random drug testing on ground workers because they know most of them will fail for either cannabis or coke.
Is that right?
So they don't test them. Because if they test them, what is the one thing you need before you need bricklayers? You need people digging footings, stripping sites.
It's very interesting. So obviously I don't work on big sites anymore. I just do my own stuff, and then if I've got someone on my site, you can usually tell by looking at someone if they're, what type of person they are and if they're sort of like to be on something. But I can imagine, I guess it's numbers to some extent, isn't it? You've got a big site, you've got hundreds, sometimes thousands even, on a massive site of people. There's going to be all sorts in there, aren't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And, at the end of the day, it's about making sure it's a safe site for everybody to be on. Everyone's got a right to go home at the end of the day. And people that are taking those kind of risks. I had to file a direct report a few years, probably about 6 years ago now, because we brought in random drug testing. Me, the MD, and the head of HR were the first people to do it, and we passed, obviously. And we did the next lot of people, and it was completely random. And this guy failed for cocaine, and he dropped his kids off on the way to school, on the way to the office. And I had to fire him because it was literally we did an amnesty for 3 months and said anybody after that, you're out. If you tell us now, we'll get you help. But if once that amnesty period's passed, That's it, game over. And it's fine. It's one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, take a man's living away from him. But you can't have that on a building site. It's dangerous.
Skills.
Yes.
What do we think about that in terms of how things are now, in terms of and how they used to be?
I think you need a much more diverse skill set these days. You know, planning there's so much more to it. There is so much more to the front end of a deal than ever there used to be. You know, it's not just about what you can fit on site these days. You know, the numbers have got to stack up. It's a really tight market out there. Construction costs are higher than ever. You know, in parts of the country, we've got nutrient neutrality. We've got BNG everywhere. There's lots more components that need to be understood and appreciated, but also all of those things come with costs. Like every year, it seems like we need another 2 or 3 consultants on every project, and you don't necessarily need to know the forensics of what the person's doing, but you definitely need to know what they need to do, and you also need to understand at what point in that timeline they've got to do that thing, because some of that stuff is driven by seasons.
We did a whole podcast on biodiversity, net gain, and all the rest of it, including explaining the whole seasonal bit to people, because a lot of people don't know
People don't get it
and come unstuck
massively
because they're stuck for 6 months waiting to be able to do a ecological survey or a bat survey or whatever it might be.
Yeah, and if they don't get the other stuff that follows on from it lined up properly, some of that stuff can then expire, and then you're back round the loop again.
Yeah.
So understanding how it all fits together is absolutely crucial.
So in terms of your people that do your training and stuff like that, is it largely, well, who is it? Is it a lot of builders, or what is it?
So we've kind of got 2 kind of like typical clients, like client avatars. We've got builders that want to aspire to be developers and do their first developments that, you know, some of them have been going for 5 years, others have been doing it for like 15, 20 years. So that's kind of like one type of client. And then the other type of client is people that want to get into development but have never done it before. Might have some transferable skills from being in the sort of a construction role, but quite often they're not. They're totally from out of the industry. We've had people that are like software engineers. We've had people that are HR managers, all manner of different stuff. And sometimes actually they get results faster because they haven't got to unlearn loads of stuff that they've learnt by being in construction.
Yeah.
So they're the 2 typical kind of clients we work with. I like working with both clients. I have a natural affinity to working with the builders because it's kind of where I come from. But I also love helping people use development as a vehicle to grow their wealth far quicker than they ever would in a salary just paying into a normal pension.
Let's jump back to the building, because that is becoming a much bigger problem now, actually being able to afford largely to get stuff built.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you know, again, I mentioned that HBF Home Builders Federation little chart earlier. The report that came from went with a survey into the biggest barriers to growth for smaller house builders and developers, right? And what for years and years and years, that survey always says the same thing, right? It was sort of like all the people surveyed, 40-ish% said the land was the biggest problem. The other 40% said planning was the biggest problem.
Yeah.
Land and planning is all mixed up. It's actually the same thing,
It's the
really.
same thing, really.
And
yeah.
20% sort of said finance was the problem, right? One of the things I always say when I talk about this thing is if you've got the right land and you've got the right planning, i.e. you're not paying too much for stuff and you're actually ideally adding planning value yourself,
throughout,
then the finance thing sort of sorts itself out to a large extent.
Well, yeah, because the 2 things investors want to look at really in my experience is, does the deal stack up and who are the professional team that are going to build it out? Yeah. They're less interested in actually who is that person, who's the newbie developer, because if the deal stacks up and you've got the right team of professionals, the ability to influence that is not actually that massive for the person that's actually acting as the developer, because you've got a project manager, you've got an architect, you've got a structural engineer, you've got all the right consultants in place. And it's why developers and development finance providers want to understand what the contractual relationships are between all of those parties. It's why they're now sort of pressing more and more for collateral warranties and stuff to exist, because they want to make sure that they're going to be protected and the money's going to be protected.
Yeah, well, not only that, obviously one of the other reasons is because, you know, development is risky, and it's getting riskier, but particularly what's happening with costs and stuff. And more and more developers and people are getting the plug pulled on them.
Yes. So
lenders know that they might end up having to step in.
Yeah.
And therefore,
that's why they're forcing, they won't accept people's build costs at the level they're demonstrating they can build at, because they're not bothered necessarily about that. They're worried about what is the build cost going to be if the bank have to step in and take the site. and develop it out. And they're not going to muck around getting into construction management. It's just going to bring a wholesale main contractor in and deliver it, which comes at a premium. And I get it. I understand it, I understand why monitoring surveyors have got the opinion they've got, why the lenders have got the opinion they've got. The frustration, I think, sometimes, though, is how much of that is genuine and how much of that is just driven by, I need to make sure my PI is not going to get pulled.
Some people watching or listening to this might not understand all the contractual stuff, right? For me, I know big time people should not get involved in development unless, ideally, I think they need to know what they're doing, really. This is not some sort of thing where you can offload everything to other people and, sit back and get the passive income, right?
It definitely ain't passive.
It just doesn't work like that, right? So absolutely, people want to get involved in development. They need to have a good understanding, at least, of how it all fits together.
Yeah,
doesn't mean they have to know everything and do everything, but they do have to know and do a lot. It's definitely not sit back, take it easy. Like my whole model's always been finding proper 100% off market sites, so you're never paying for too much for stuff.
Yep.
Then add in maximum planning and design value, right? So let's just assume now how you do that's a whole nother big question.
Yeah, that's
but once you've got there, question is how do you get the thing built?
Yeah, absolutely.
Perhaps you want to talk about the various ways that someone that's not a builder themselves might get stuff built.
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, for us, really, like we can add as project management and cost consultants, we can add the most value the earlier we're brought in that process. Because I was on a call with somebody yesterday who's had an offer accepted on a £5 million building just off Euston Road. Brilliant, but actually it's a full hard frontage site, so you need probably 200 grand in your prelims to cover things like lay down areas, parking. There's loads of different ways. We're fortunate we live in a time now of MMC, so like modern methods of construction. Timber frame is considered traditional construction almost these days, thank God. You've got ICF, you've got METSEC, metal frame buildings. There's loads of different ways. When I'm looking at something, I want to look at what is the most cost-effective way that's the least painful to get to have the roof on as quickly as possible. Because the minute I've got that roof on, I've got all my internal trades working inside, smashing through the remainder of the programme. I can then have the external skin being built, which is why I love like light gauge steel. I like timber frame. ICF's okay. All of those systems allow that, and that brings the construction program down. And if you can shave weeks off that program, if you've got a proper run site with a site manager on site, you're going to have Harris fencing securing the site. You're going to have a forklift. You're going to have prelims. You're going to have utilities. You've got funding costs at the back end of your program, which is when it gets the most expensive. Yeah. So every week you can shave off that program is probably £3,500 to £4,000.
Yeah.
So I've got mentees that literally had never built anything. They took a field and built a finished house in 22 weeks. And people are like, how is that possible? Because every single day we moved the needle. Stuff happened. We had a proper Gantt chart. Stuff happened. The trades and labour knew because 6 weeks before we'd had a pre-order meeting with them. 2 weeks before they'd had a phone call to say, right, all the gear's on site, so that people knew when they were coming to site, everything was on site. The bricklayers bought the site manager a crate of beer. They said, we've never earned such good money, even though the prices were really tight, because every bit of gear was on site, right down to like wind posts, fixings, ties, all those little sundry things that get forgotten. And that's what for me it's about. It's not about like slashing trades rates down. You need to pay a good quality because otherwise they've got no investment in delivering quality.
Yeah.
It's about being organised and being efficient. And that's just simple stuff like having the procurement done properly, having good quality design, having drawings that are actually produced properly, not just say, I'll refer to this other document, having all the information that's readily available, having honest conversations with people about where the price is, agreeing fair payment terms in a contract, having a program that is not just the most expensive bit of wallpaper, it's actually a communication tool, and then letting people get on and do their job and just managing it with having a good site manager or a good main contractor if you want to go main contractor.
So there's obviously all different methodologies and ways of getting stuff built.
Yeah, loads of different
Every
ways.
site's different, every situation is different. It's horses for courses, right?
Yeah.
Which I've got to say, actually, is one of the biggest mistakes people make is just doing the same thing all the time, right? Everything, whether it be buying the site, coming up with the right scheme, getting planning, building it is absolutely got to be bespoke for that site.
Yeah, just because it worked over there doesn't mean it's going to work here. Just because that product worked in that market doesn't mean that same house type is going to work in a different area.
So I want to come on to procurement and contracts and stuff like that in a minute. But before we do that, one other thing I want to jump on before I forget, conversions.
Yes.
Because there's a big difference between new build and
massively
conversions.
different.
And I know lots of people think, because it's a conversion, it's easier. But that's not the case, is it?
No, definitely not. They're not hard, but they're different. I love new build and I love converting commercial assets, but they're two different things. A new build, the minute you're out of the ground and up to damp, every single thing is on a drawing. Buying a commercial building, until it's stripped out, you don't know the extent and scope of what you're actually finding. It's why we always use what's called a PCSA, so pre-construction services agreement. So we get the strip out done first, and then we award the main contract for the construction, because once we've stripped it back to a shell and we've got the structural appraisal done, we know what's in there then. But until you get to that point, there's a significant risk. I always find it really funny when people say to me, I don't want to do new build, it's really risky. I'll start off doing some buy-to-lets. Love buy-to-lets, nothing wrong with BRRs at all. Great model for building passive income. Buying a wanked out 3-bedroom house that has got plasterboard covering everything up, you don't know when the services were installed, is massively risky. You go and buy a Victorian one and it's pointed in lime, that thing could be as live as anything. You don't know that until you start stripping it out. Well, buying a site, you can see that. You can de-risk it through the right surveys if you know what you're doing. You can work out what you're going to do. You can get planning. That, in my mind, that's way less risky.
It is, yeah.
But the difficulty is that lots of people that sort of start doing property have probably decorated their lounge and put a shelf up and done a few bits. So it's not such a leap of faith to think, well, okay, I'll go and tart up a house and rent it out.
There's a lot of people out there that, they're spinning the whole, selling the latest commercial conversion bullshit course about how easy it is. And it's not easy, is it? And it's, like bigger buildings, bigger, issues potentially.
Yeah.
And of course, people that don't know will be making assumptions and getting into that deal without stripping it back and without knowing what's there.
They haven't even got the money in there for the strip out quite often.
Exactly. And now, unless you've been there and discovered the hard way the problems that arise.
Exactly,
then, and I don't know, how much you get involved with people doing that. So, well, I'm sure if they're involved with you, they're going to be doing it right to start with.
I teach commercial property. I've got loads of clients that are doing it, and we've done it successfully for decades. There are people where there's been horror stories, but there's also people where, like we did one in Park Royal, I had to work it out, for sure it was 23 years ago. We had 80 grand's worth of scrap out of the building that was not in our cost plan. So straight away it's like 80 grand cash, blinding, absolutely brilliant. And I hope the tax man's not watching. But equally, I went and looked at a building a couple of weeks ago. There's a 40 grand generator sitting on the roof that, no one's allowed for. So we're like, okay, brilliant. Result. That's
the exception rather than the rule. More likely it's going to be 100 grand's worth of asbestos or HAC or something like that.
Yeah. If you don't know the rules of the game, you're going to get burnt. You can't turn up at Twickenham on a fucking polo pony with a set of golf clubs. You're there to play rugby. And that's what people don't get. They're trying to play the wrong game on the wrong pitch. If you understand what the variables are, so is this made out of rat concrete? Is there asbestos in it? Is there knotweed in the garden? What's the situation with the roof covering? Is the structure capable of doing what we want to do to it? All of that is discernible and calculable by just hiring the right consultants to do the right surveys. But most people don't do those surveys, and they'll go and buy something with those issues, not knowing that they're issues. Me and you both know, right? Risk is a good thing. If it's in the box on the table and we can both see it, and we sit down and we look all the way around it and we work out a plan to deal with it, that's where opportunity comes from. If you don't have risk, we can't have opportunity. But if the risk is under here, neither of us can see it. And that's when it comes in T-bones at 100 miles an hour.
So basically, there's a lot people do need to know.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot that can go wrong.
Yeah.
So that's why I always bang on about. It's one of the reasons for doing this, really, to educate people,
share knowledge and help people
about stuff you need to be aware of. Now, when it comes to getting something built, so various forms of contracts and stuff like that, let's perhaps have a little chat and explain the options for people.
I love talking about contracts. So we're now in 2025. We've just got the JCT the 2024 suite through finally, which is a good thing. 99% of everything I do is under JCT contract. I've done NEC stuff, so like new engineering contract for people that are listening. I've done PPC stuff. I was really fortunate to be kind of like at the sort of the pinnacle in terms of like seniority in construction companies when partnering was a big thing. So, you know, we did like monster JVs and alliances with big construction businesses. If you looked at the amount of deals, 99% of it's been under JCT. You know, it's a nice suite of contracts. They're familiar. There's different levels of contract for different types of projects. All of the model forms are there. There's loads of case law around it, which is what you need to understand, because it's not just what the contract says, it's what all of the case law says that sits around it that's actually been battle-tied in court. So personally, JCT contracts are my favourite. Most of what we do is minor works or intermediate. If it's bigger stuff, we'll use the standard building contract, which is for like decent sized stuff over sort of 5 million. And then when it's not just about how many pounds it is, it's the complexity of it. If you've got a straightforward new build or straightforward conversion, JCT intermediate is absolutely fine.
So let's assume, let's say someone, you know, a builder of some sort, small, maybe quite big, contractor, in which case they would probably build the thing for themselves. So construction management, right? So maybe you explain construction management a bit, and then we'll jump on to the stuff, but the people that can't do it that way.
Typically, you would hire a project manager to act as a project manager, and then all of the contracts would be between the developer and the individuals subcontractors. The benefit of that is that you can bring forward the construction because you can get those key appointments done a lot earlier, because you don't need all of the information around the finishes and stuff to tie up a big main contract. So you can move faster. It enables you to be more nimble. It doesn't give you price certainty, because until all those trade packages are let, you haven't got the surety around what those prices are going to be. So you might be placing the orders for things like groundworks, the brickwork, the frame, the roof maybe, all of those kinds of key things, but you haven't got your M&E nailed down and you haven't got your finishes. Well, a massive part of any project is in the services and in the finishes. They're probably more expensive than quite often the frame can be. So it doesn't necessarily give you that whole project cost certainty. If you're using your own money, absolutely fine. If you want to use any kind of like institutional lending or development finance, they're not going to want to be in that party, because they want surety. They want to know what the whole of the construction cost is. So, you know, they're not going to be as willing to sort of get on board. I have done them. They just want a far more robust project team than you would get away with if you had traditional contract. And if you're a developer that's actually also the contractor, it's still achievable. You just have a JCT intermediate contract written between DevCo and the building contractor, which a lot of people are like, well, why am I paying for a contract? Well, because they're two different businesses. They might have the same directors, but you've got a different legal wrapper around DevCo than you've got around the contracting business. And any lender is going to want a fixed JCT contract between those parties. So it's doable. It's not complicated to do. You just need to have the paperwork in place.
Historically, typically, I construction manage my own stuff because obviously I come from construction. I know construction. And it's worth adding, now, lenders will let you do that if they know that you're really experienced and then they're a bit more comfortable with it. As a general rule, they probably won't.
No.
And as a general rule, actually, I probably wouldn't advise anyone to try the construction managed stuff unless they were very experienced themselves, right?
Yeah, I would never, well, my insurance wouldn't allow me to tell somebody to do that, put really, really plainly, because there's far more goes into project managing and site managing the development than most people can appreciate and most people can actually understand. And it's very easy, and we're both really experienced at doing it, but someone who's not can very easily get burnt out through the simple things like decision fatigue, where you're getting ironed out with questions from it seems like everybody on the planet, because the architect wants to know what you want to do about something, the structural engineer wants to know something else, the ecologist wants something else, and that's without starting to talk about the supply chain. So it can be very easy to get overwhelmed. So I wouldn't suggest that anybody that's new to development starts by trying to deliver their own development, because it will fail, because you haven't got the depth of experience and the depth of knowledge to be able to answer those questions with the right kind of commercial awareness that actually any decision you make is going to have financial impact, and that might be this big, but equally it could be this big, and it could also be off the scale. The amount of developers that get into the shit because they don't even track the cost impact of their decisions, and they get to the end and the builder's got their final account and they're like, well, why have I got 300 grand's worth of extras? I saw one just last week. It was like 290 grand's worth of variations. The client had brought us in to try and kind of almost like mediate. Said to go out, send me all the stuff through, and every single one of them, I mean, it's like 14 variations. Every single one, the guy's backed up in writing with an email, sent to the client, sent to the architect, and every single one he's also given not quite a first principles breakdown, but he said, right, it's this much for this element. You've asked for 6 things. Each one is, here's the 6 prices. And he's even said on some of them, the labour's that, the materials are that. And I'm like, you got nowhere to go. You've instructed him to do it. You can't argue with it. Just because you've failed to appreciate the cost of those things doesn't mean he's not entitled to get paid for it.
In summary, avoid construction management unless you're very experienced.
Yeah.
Right? But one thing, just in terms of the pros and cons, the pros, if you do know what you're doing...
Oh, you can save a lot of money.
Oh, of course, you can save a lot of money because you haven't got everyone's, including the main contractor's markup on everything.
Absolutely, yeah.
You're getting the benefit of all of that for yourself. But in order to get that benefit, you've got to do everything that they would be doing.
Exactly.
So you've got to know how to do it.
You've got to know how to do it, yeah.
So let's just jump onto what would perhaps be a more typical procurement route.
Yeah.
Certainly for someone that isn't massively experienced.
There's different models you can go down. You can do single stage tendering, so you get all your design together, or your QS or PM gets all the design together. So you finish your schedule, your drawings, your structural drawings, your planning, any of your consultants' documents, puts that together in a tender pack, sends it out to normally like 5 contractors because you want 3 prices back. And me and you both know there's always going to be one who says, yeah, I'll do it, and they're never going to do it. And there's one that says, I'll do it, and they're late. You get 3 prices back, work out which one works the best. And it's not just about price, it's about have they got the skills, have they got the right knowledge, have they got the right capability, because that's absolutely crucial. And the companies I'm a non-exec of, we actually use a 7 Cs model to actually establish whether an opportunity is for us in the first instance.
How's that work? I don't know what that is. Tell me about that.
So we look at the capability, we look at the client, we look at who the consultants are, we look at have they got the cash, we look at the business that I'm a non-exec of, which is one of a number. Have they got the capability to deal with it? We look at the complexity of the project and say, is this something that is within our gift to be able to deliver? We look at, have we got the communication to be able to do this? Because, if it's straightforward, yes, like some of them, like one's an RC frame company, absolutely brilliant, but they get sent all sorts of stuff at civils and wouldn't work for them. And then we look at the communication, and then we look at all of that overall. And if any single one of those is a no, then it's a no bid.
Okay, so this is for you for the when you're actually considering.
Yeah.
Are we even going to look at this project as a?
Yeah. And if it's not a hell yes, it's a hell no.
Yeah. Very good.
So that's single stage tendering. So where you send out all of the stuff, you send it out to a load of contractors, or you create like a cloud link or whatever, which is what most people do these days. Send it out. It's normally 4 to 6 weeks return to give people a decent opportunity to price it. Because here's the thing, in construction, as we both know, no main contractor is sitting there with all these people on a peg. So they're going to chop up that package, send it out to subcontractors to get prices. So you've got that time delay, which is like three days to a week quite often. Busy periods of time, that can be 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Then they've got to get the prices back together. Then they've got to present it at a board level. Then they've got to say, okay, then they've got to do what they call like tender settlement. So most estimators price stuff net. Then the board of directors decide what margin they're going to put on it. I'm teaching you it's like eggs because you've been there, but the audience
this
probably
is for
haven't.
everyone else.
The board of directors will say, well, we want 5% or 20% margin on that, and actually where are we at with the prelims? So prelims is preliminaries, which is like the site management stuff. The one thing that people quite often miss is a contingency, like at the back of the prelims. So, and it's one of the first things we always check. It's how Grenfell started, was that they missed the 300 grand contingency out. So what's the contingency? So that's single stage tendering. You can go 2 stage where you'll send out just like a prior information notice, like a PIN notice, saying we're going to build this block of 10 apartments in Catford. We're going to start in 22 weeks. Please tell us what your overs and profit will be and what are your prelims. Because that's really easy. A contractor could put a reply to a PIN notice, relatively straightforwardly in probably about 2 hours. It's not hard, even putting in all this bullshit that they put in with it. So it enables them to give you some kind of steer as to are they affordable at a much lower price point, but far faster. So you might send a pin notice out to 15 contractors with a view to shortlisting to 5, and they'll come back and say, well, our overheads and profit are 8%, or our overheads are 8% when we want 5% profit, and you get a bandwidth of what those look like, and then you say, well, okay, we're going to shortlist to 3 contractors, and then we'll go to second stage, which is effectively pretty similar to what the hold stage looks like if you do single stage.
Yeah.
So that's dual stage, or you can just go straight negotiation. If you've got a contractor that you know, like, and trust, and they're the right contractor for the project, you can just do direct negotiation. But the danger with direct negotiation is there's no competition, and quite often lots of assumptions get made because it tends to be a much more informal process. And the less data there is, the more scope there is for interpretation. And interpretation is the one thing that leads to variation and scope creep. So I'm not I'm not a massive advocate of negotiation. Not sitting with my client hat on. I loved negotiation as a contractor because it was an opportunity to do all the stuff I've just said are the reasons why you wouldn't want to do it, which is why that's my advice, because I've been the other side. I feel a bit like poacher turned gamekeeper.
In construction, it's like anything in negotiation, I suppose, with contractors. There are people that will price something to get a foot in the door, knowing very well that you've missed a load of
Done
stuff.
it loads.
Yeah, and it's going to be a load more than that. But once you're in and once you're contractual and once stuff starts changing, the door is open, and you as a client might not end up the way like the way it's going, but you've agreed it, you've changed it, you didn't have a fixed detailed design. There's loopholes all over the place. That's, a lot of contractors, and it's a big problem in the construction industry, actually. A lot of the business is about claims.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I've done over £500,000 worth of training on contracts. I've done like weeks worth of training, like I've done months, but I recall one particular course I went on. It was 4 weeks just on claim prep, like looking at, and some of the stuff we do now is actually looking at a design pack and going, well, where are the gaps? Where are the things that someone could come along and spank us on the arse and going, well, actually, that's a variation. I've done claims for people where they've done like portal frames and there's no concrete floor. There's literally no floor in the bid documents. And I'm like, well, it's a variation. It's not in the tender. I'm like, well, no, we want a factory power floated floor. Okay, it was a variation. The amount of stuff that people miss, because so much stuff is copy and pasted that I don't think I've ever seen a set of bid documents that are absolutely perfect. I looked at a JCT contract November, December last year, written by an architect. Like literally, there was no start and finish date. The price was as close to £690,000 as practically possible. Well, that's not a price, and you've got no fixed completion date. It's utterly ludicrous. Yeah. But someone's paid an architect to write that.
So just on that, because it's sort of related to that, worth talking about fixed price contracts. Because I, talk to people about this type of stuff. And they'll show me a development appraisal, and I'll say, "Look, that don't work." And they'll, well, yeah, it does. I say, "You're never going to build it for that." And they say, "Yeah, we are, because we've got a fixed price contract." But have you? Have you got 100% fixed, detailed building regs, detailed design? Nothing's going to change.
Yeah,
and we all know the answer to that is going to be no.
Yeah, because they're at stage 2. They've just got a concept.
So I don't know about you. I mean, to be honest, I don't think I've ever seen. I mean, I wouldn't even try to get involved in them because I know that they. You usually don't have time to fix a contract, the design enough. So you want to fix it as far as you can, but you'd be stupid to think.
Well, that's why things like provisional sums and PS sums exist, isn't it? So that the bits that you can't nail down at that point in time, you have the ability to still enter a fixed price contract, but it's got provisional sums in, which get omitted on day one, and then the actual cost of delivering those packages gets put back in, which is why you need to have a reasonably good grasp of what those costs are going to be, because those defined provisional sums want to kind of try and stay within the confines of what they are. But it's why typically you also have a general contingency in the prelims to cover that. There might be a complete unforeseen. We might find some UXO in the ground, like unexploded ordnance, and we've got a 4-week delay where we've got to deal with it. There's a few things that can bite you on the arse, but you want to have defined provisional sums for the things that are in there that you're going to need some tiles, right? If you're building units, but you might not know what the finishes are because the sales team or the interior designer might not have chosen them yet. So you put a provisional sum in for the tiles. You can still get to a point where you've got a fixed contract of sorts. However, there is scope in there for those things to move, and yeah, they can move up, but equally they can move down.
I don't recall seeing them move down very often.
Depends whether us QSs take our muzzle off or not.
Well, I mean, I suppose the other thing is, time is a big issue here, because usually what happens, it takes forever to get planning, and then obviously getting your detailed design. That's not quick. Building regs are changing all the time. Buildings are getting more complex.
They are indeed.
We talked about M&E and that earlier. So, and usually, you've got a contract, you've got to buy the site by a certain date, so you're under pressure, but otherwise your contract's going to run out. You've got, who knows, all sorts of things.
And this is why you need to be trained, right? Because there's so many different variables. It's almost like being a waiter in a Greek restaurant.
Yeah,
but you need to be an octopus to spin the amount of plates you've got to spin, and that's why people aren't always successful. Unfortunately, there's a lot of things to think about, and it is about literally taking all of that confusion and lining it up and saying, okay, right, what do I need to get to my next stage? What's the end goal? But let's not get too fixated on the end goal, because I'm at stage 2 and I've got a concept. I just now need to get to space planning in stage 3. I'm not worried about technical detail yet, because actually I'm still at stage 2. But you can't get to a fixed price until you're at stage 4 and you've got a fully detailed design. And, unfortunately, it does take time and it does take cost. No architect is doing a stage 4 drawing without getting paid for it. It's just not happening.
Rules around building regs and responsibility have changed relatively recently.
Massively, yeah.
Maybe you might want to explain to people about that.
Post-Grenfell world, we had the Hackett report, which led to the Building Safety Act coming out. I think it's a really good thing. I've got to be honest. It's not the first time I've said that. I've been on record and said that a number of times, and I firmly believe it, because there was so much lack of understanding about what building control's responsibility is. Building control's responsibility has never been to sign off the quality of a whole building. They come out at specific junctures and look at very, very small pieces of work and say, that's acceptable. That doesn't mean it's not the contractor's responsibility to deliver a quality product. All it means is building control have come and looked at the end of that bit of microphone and said, yeah, that bit's acceptable. This bit might be rusty and falling over, but they're not supposed to be looking at it. They're looking at this. But so many people have had this misconceived belief that they're looking at the whole of the thing, and they're not. So I think it's a good thing. I think there could have been more consultation with industry. There's a massive lack of understanding around it. I had an architect shouting and screaming in block capitals on Facebook at me yesterday because he's telling me that he's not a principal designer on a job. I'm like, well, you're doing an extension for a domestic client. The law says that if they don't appoint a principal designer, it becomes you. He's like, well, I haven't accepted the commission. It doesn't matter if you've accepted the commission. The law says it's you. You can't trump the law.
So it's interesting. And they didn't understand that?
No, they didn't understand it and refused to accept it. And I said, well, what you're telling me is kind of like me saying to you, I'm going to drive to the end of my road, I'm going to get to the M1, and I'm going to get a copy of the highway code, and I'm going to tear it up and go, yeah, this don't apply to me because I don't feel like it. I want to drive down a motorway at 100 miles an hour. It's still the law. Just because I don't want it to apply to me doesn't mean it doesn't. You can't trump the law. But there's such a lack of understanding, and there's certainly within like professional teams, but even more so with builders. Because like most small domestic builders don't even know what the role principal contractor is.
That's why I'm mentioning it.
Which is a massively scary proposition. Yeah. Really scary. What lots of trades do is they will actually do some of the design work, especially in the domestic development world. Well, they're then the contractor, the principal designer, and the principal contractor. Because if the client is domestic and they don't appoint any of those people, all of that responsibility then just passes on to the builder. And the builder, like, finished trade school 30 years ago and did a 2-hour module on health and safety, which basically meant do your boots on, put an hard hat on.
Yeah. It
didn't cover any of that stuff. And yet that's the very person that's now legally responsible. I mean, Rose Builders, I think it was yesterday, had a 3-ton mini digger go over and kill someone. They were prosecuted 5 years ago for having like somebody die in a dumper. There was not enough training around the whole kind of like project management, health and safety stuff in the small scale construction industry, because CPD is not a thing. They don't sell CPD at Jewson's, and all people at that level are looking at is actually, right, where's my next project coming from? Whereas if they embraced all that stuff, they would find it an easier transition into development because they'd be more professional.
In terms of builders and contractors, they don't want to be designers.
No, they don't. I understand that totally, and I agree. And they shouldn't be. But the law says that if nobody's appointed in a domestic environment, it becomes them. If you move into people doing commercial development, so they're building a house in a field that they're going to sell, that's commercial. The client then, and this is where it gets even more perverse, the client is the ultimate duty holder, right? So the client has a legal obligation to hire a principal contractor and principal designer if there's more than one contractor on site, so more than one trade. In a commercial setting, if they don't hire them, they become the client. Well, the irony of that is that if you look at the people in a construction contract, you've got the developer who's the client, you've got the principal designer and the principal contractor. Of those three people, who knows the least about running a construction project? The client. And yet, if they don't hire the other two, it becomes the person who knows the least about it. So in my mind, that's almost like setting the system up to fail in the first place. Just saying that the information's on the HSE's website is, you're not promoting someone to take the right kind of like decision architecture. I was watching on Instagram yesterday, there's a guy who was I think he was on the board of Ogilvy, the marketing company, Rory Sutherland.
I like him.
I love his stuff to bits. He's a really funny guy. And he was talking about actually the value of information and how it's actually put out there. And there's a junction on, I think it's the M25, where you go to Sydenham. And where the gantry is past where the road splits. So the information is absolutely useless because by the time you can see it, you're already in the wrong lane. Well, that's to me a bit like just saying, well, all the information in relation to construction management and project management is on the HSE's website. Because nobody's going there to look until there's a problem. Well, when there's a problem, it's too late.
What do you think, got a few final little tips and things, what would make it all easier for people?
I think training and education, obviously I'm going to say that, but I'm biased. I think the reason I say that is because understanding the value and the importance of making the right decision at the right time with the right people. And to give you an example, lots of people's default thing is, my first action is I'm going to go and hire an architect. That is not the first thing that you want to do. If you think you've got something that's an opportunity, talk to a planning consultant, because planning consultants are qualified in planning permission. They're going to give you a steer as to what you can actually do. An architect's just going to draw you some drawings. And an architect is vested in wanting to go to all the way to stage 4 so they can charge you a fortune for building regs drawings. I get it, totally understand it. But I wouldn't go and ask my GP to sort my teeth out. It's the wrong tool for the job. So understand what you're doing and then hire the right people at the right point in time. And development is not a DIY strategy. It's about getting the right people to do the right things and becoming the conductor of the orchestra.
I don't know if it's disagreeing, but at least point out something that people need to be aware of as well in terms of developers or want-to-be developers or experienced developers. Absolutely, we need to work with the best people, right? Who will, or at least should be, experts in their little areas, right? But when it comes to development, there is a lot of different stuff. It's a bit like when it comes to building something, there's a lot of different people involved. All of the subcontractors and, of course...
That's why due diligence is absolutely vital.
The management.
And checking out people's credentials.
So absolutely. But then, even if you got the best planner, you got the best architect, you got all of the other stuff, they don't necessarily... Yeah, they might be able to tell you what the planning policy is, and you might be able to do this and this, but it isn't actually their job to know all of the other stuff. So one of the biggest mistakes I see people make is thinking that you just talk to an architect or a planning consultant and they'll tell you what you can do.
No.
They don't know what you can do, or they certainly don't know the best thing to do, because if they did, they would be the developer earning fortunes. Absolutely, they need to know. So, I just don't want people to think, all I've got to do is go and talk to an architect, go and talk to a planner, because people do think that.
Yeah, they do.
And that is the main way they can massively unstuck.
To sort of put some more sort of meat around what I said, I think you need to have those conversations, but you also need to understand that does what I want to do work commercially?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to pay £1 million for a piece of land and I can get 6 units on it. But if those 6 units are only worth probably 125 grand each, let's say, it's not going to stack up, is it? So it's got, whatever the product is you're going to build, one has got to work commercially, but also you've got to be able to sell it. And some of the, I mean, I've seen people like starting schemes of like 40 units, and they're putting 40 like new bed apartments into an area that's already saturated with 1 and 2 bedroom apartments.
What's that?
The market,
Luton.
it was one of the places, but the market can't take it. So it's got to be, does it stack up commercially? But also, can I get out of it? What's my exit? And if that exit doesn't work, what's my alternative exit? And then if that exit doesn't work, what's my sort of protect the downside, as Richard Branson would say? What's my kind of like my backup to my backup? Yeah. You've always got to have a backup plan. It's like when you're letting trade packages. It's why we send out for like 5 inquiries. If we're doing construction management, we'll go for 5 trade inquiries. We want 5 returns. There's always things that can go wrong in a project. You can have the best subbie in the world who's been great for 10 years, but if they get knocked by another contractor, their business can go under overnight. If you're in an advanced state, like I'm thinking of a steel worker that we used to use. That's who came to mind. He got knocked by another contractor for the best part of £1 million. We were about 8 weeks into 14-week design process with him on a project. We had to go back to square one with someone else. So you've always got to think about, actually, right, okay, essentially it's a risk assessment. What is the likelihood of this happening, and what is the severity if it does, and how can I protect that? And that's the same with anything in development. You've always got to be thinking about, it's like playing chess, right? You don't make that move without knowing what the potential range of consequences. It's like when you watch politicians talk or interviewers, they never say anything without knowing that the range of outcomes that they're going to get back could be somewhere across here. And they've already got the answer for each of those different things. That's kind of like development.
Final little thing we didn't talk about, and it's major one, it's build costs.
Yes, build costs.
So, I mean, it is getting more and more difficult to get things to stack up nowadays, as costs have risen, and end values, which is typically what get people out of the shit. Actually, is end values going up. Obviously, that hasn't really happened for a couple of years, and probably won't. And you can't and shouldn't rely on that anyway. If you're relying on values going up to get you out of the shit, well, that's just speculation. It isn't development, right?
Well, you've only got to look at some of the developers that have hit the skids recently, and they've been trading on that for buying sites, thinking that, okay, well, do you know what, it's a bit tight, but my GDV will be 25% higher. Well, all that takes is what's happened, which is like people say, oh, the market's dropped off. The market's just softened a bit. Yeah. It was overcooked. I mean, Kensington and Chelsea and places like that was just insane. But if you look at more sensible areas around the country, there's still demand. We need more product. We haven't got enough product. So prices are never going to drop through the floor. But what you have got is obviously we've got like additional requirements under building regulations. We're now at part R of the building regs. We've got to spend up to $2,000 getting broadband put into a property when the person that buys the house can get it put in for free. Like, what is that all about? Yeah. We're putting EV charging in. Well, how many people have actually got an electric car? How much of this stuff actually makes any sense? I'm not saying don't insulate properties properly. I'm not saying don't make sure the electrics and everything is done. I want to build a quality product, but why are we bolting loads of shit into property that actually may never even get used in all reality? It's insane. I mean, like some of the stuff with B&G, planting wildflower meadows, and it's absolutely crazy. I mean, I was talking to an ecologist about a project in Luton, funnily enough, and it's an old derelict garage site. Well, not derelict, but almost derelict. And it's got like a massive hard standing and a load of garages at the back. And she's talking to me about the ecology value of some weeds in a crack in the concrete.
Previous podcast I talked about earlier, we talk about all of that. It is insane, and there's some real crazy unintended consequences.
There is, yeah.
And it's part of the problem generally, actually, within the whole industry. As more and more regulation and cost gets thrown at stuff, it just makes more and more stuff unviable.
Yeah.
And also what happens is developers get more and more forced to squeeze their margins to get deals done on what is already a too risky business.
Yeah, exactly. It's nuts. Like the risk profile's gone up. And the language around this is really important because B&G doesn't mean deals don't stack up. I just want to burst that myth for people that are watching, right? What B&G means is that, unfortunately...
Well, it can mean that.
Well, it doesn't. What it means is that dear Mr. Vendor ain't going to get what they think they're going to get for the site. Because the only thing... This is the problem that exists with the site. I can sit in my developer's office. I haven't got that problem. I only get that problem when I buy the site. So if the problem comes with the site, who should bear the risk of that? The person who owns the site. But they don't want to because they're wedded to the idea that the site's worth a third because some idiot estate agent has told them it's worth a third. Well, it's not worth a third. And it's even if it was worth a third, it's only worth a third of the whole scheme. But you've got to look at the whole costs. It's no good saying, well, it's worth a third, but we're not gonna like include all of these costs with meeting these obligations because that's not looking at the correct set of data. But so many people miss that. And they just, oh, well, my deal doesn't stack up. Well, you just need to go back to the person selling the site and say, well, look, unfortunately, had you have sold this 5 years ago, before B&G was a thing, yeah, we would have paid this. But now, actually, can you understand we've now got these other costs? We can't any longer pay that. All of a sudden, then, they don't see you as bad guy. They've still got the same problem. It's why one of the guys on my power team is the UK's top hostage negotiator. His skill set and his communication skill set is far greater than mine. And sometimes we need to be able to rely on that to get the conversation moved forward and get the deal.
It's worth knowing when it comes to getting deals done, most landowners, in fact, I think I've hardly ever met a landowner that didn't have unrealistic expectations, right?
They've all got them to start with.
Very often, it might be their only asset or their most valuable asset or the most valuable asset they're ever likely to own. So clearly, they're not going to give it away easy. So a big part of this whole process is about educating them about how things really work.
Yeah, what's the real world like?
Including all the cost of B&G, development costs, Section 106, SIL, affordable housing, and interestingly, lots of developers, so-called developers, particularly new ones, they don't even understand all of that stuff themselves.
No, they don't. They get caught out time and time again. I've been asked to represent a client to get 50 grand back because they put 50 grand into a bond for the council for highways for 278 work. I'm like, but where's all the paperwork that you need to support to discharge the bond? Well, I didn't know I needed it.
Educating landowners is a big part of the process of getting deals done, not just agreeing to like, oh, well, it's £1 million or it's 10 million quid because that's what the landowner wants. Forget about what they want. That's irrelevant. But the point is, there are absolutely lots of sites that are made unviable by these things because stuff's got an existing use value as it is.
Yes.
And of course, landowners never going to sell for less than the existing use value. And usually they need a little bit of a premium over and above existing use value. And if the implication of all of these costs and all of the stuff that's been asked for, including B&G, ultimately mean you just can't get enough on there to make it stack.
Squeeze enough out of it.
Then B&G absolutely does kill deals.
Yeah, I mean we've got a building that we offered on in Bishop Stortford, and to convert it into apartments, it's a really attractive scheme. But unfortunately, the figure that it works to do that is below what they bought it for 10 years ago because they paid for it as an office. And at the time, office property in that location, commercial buildings, were worth an absolute premium. They really wanted to be in that location. It's close to the station. I get it totally, but it doesn't work. And they're like, well, yeah, but the value of it as an office is worth that. I'm like, okay, I get that. But how long have you been marketing it? 3 years? How many inquiries have you had? 100. How many tenants have you got? None. So is that really the value of it, or is this just some figure that you've got in your head?
Yeah.
I did some drone filming last year for a guy up in just the other side of York, and he's done a deal with a farmer where they've got, I think it's about 36 acres, and all they're paying for it on the 999-year lease is the crop value. And they're going to flatten it, or basically going to plough it all up and turn it into industrial estate.
Interesting. Well, just one final little thing, actually. You mentioned that. I'm personally mainly a residential developer. I do a little bit of mixed use and whatever's right for the site, actually.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Alternative stuff, such as industrial, warehouses, little sheds.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I'm actually going to be having quite a serious look at going forward because it can be easier to get that stuff to stack up.
Yeah.
Particularly because there's good demand for it in the right place.
Yeah, there is, absolutely.
And of course, it's a lot cheaper to build than residential.
It's cheaper to build, it's quicker to build, it's far less risky to build.
Yeah.
Like a lot of it's done off site. If you think about most of it's typically steel frame, 6 cladding, all that stuff's fabricated off site. It turns up, put the frame up in 2 days, put the netting up, clad the roof, block work up to first floor, clad the outside of it. All you're putting in is a single blockwork toilet and a Doc M toilet pack, and it's Cat A fit out. You can also hold it in a SAS pension.
Yeah.
And it's, it's 15-year leases minimum. So, and it's a business transaction. It's not somebody paying their rent. It's a whole different ballgame. It's concrete roads, bit of drainage.
Yeah.
What's not to love about it? And you know what? If it takes 5 years to get it through planning, put a load of containers on, rent them out.
Yeah, well, look, the thing is, you know what you're doing now. It shouldn't take you 5 years.
No, it shouldn't.
Pretty much everyone I have a conversation with, it's all doom and gloom because it's not easy in this industry,
it's not easy, no. But do you know what? It's not easy. I personally think that's good because I think what we are going to see is, and especially as regs get tighter, I think we are going to see people that are just packing up because they just don't want to do it.
100%.
Which I think represents an opportunity for people that do want to do it and want to do it properly. But it's a people business, right? It's about working with people you want to work with. And yeah, don't get me wrong, the profit's bloody nice. But for me, it's about the relationships that I get to meet and make with people along the way. And, whether that's professionals or whether that's students or, people I just meet at networking events, for me, it's a people business.
Look, I agree. And that's probably a good way to finish it because as well as, look, it is a business and it's hard work and we deserve to make a nice few quid.
Yeah, exactly.
But at the same time, we create some good stuff and make the world a better place.
Absolutely.
Good.
That note,
thank you, Richard.
That's all right.
Thanks for tuning in to Inside Property Development. Please remember to like and subscribe. Do join us every week where we'll be speaking to house builders, developers, experts, planners and everyone involved in trying to get more much needed housing created the right way. We'll learn together how we can collaborate rather than fight, and by working together we can all help create better places, spaces and homes and a much more beautiful world.